Hey folks, this video is all about horror and why Dungeons& and Dragons doesn't do it so well. What is it that makes horror scary? Horror is an intense feeling of fear, dread, shock, or disgust, and creating that feeling in games can be very difficult. And for systems like D&D, a lot of the times the game itself is working against you. D&D has plenty of scary monsters, and even the entire story of Ravenloft and Strahd that tries to create the same sense of horror that classic scary movies do. So why is it that horror is so hard to get right, especially in Dungeons and Dragons? And look, before I get too much further, let me say this. I love D&D. This video isn't about why D&D is bad, so just keep those kinds of rude comments to yourself. It's why it's not great for horror. At its core, horror thrives on three things: creating fear, overwhelming odds, and the unknown. So let's start with fear. Creating a sense of fear in movies, books, TV, even video games revolves around the player or audience immersing themselves in the role of the character. We see, hear, and sense exactly what the character is experiencing, all while being denied any outside information that would make those scenes less, well, scary. Dim lighting, suspenseful music, and the infamous jump scare all lend themselves to frightening the character and the player or audience or reader. And that's difficult to create around the table with D&D. The setting of your dining room table or your game room is at odds with the setting of the story. The outside stimulus works against the suspense that's being built in your game. And the very mechanics of D&D get in the way of the type of immersion that happens with a scary movie or book. In short, creating a sense of fear in a way that is easy for filmmakers and authors is much more difficult for the GM in a game of D&D, which is essentially a collaborative, improvisational storytelling narrative with tactical combat elements. A big thanks to all of our patrons, but especially to Arvi. If you like what we do and you want to have a direct hand in helping us make these videos, then head over to patreon.com/rollforinitiative and check out the perks of being a patron. All right, back to the video. Next is characters facing overwhelming odds. Often in horror stories, the characters, whether it's the crew of the Nostromo in Alien or final girl Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween, are faced with an adversary that is overwhelmingly powerful and seemingly indestructible. But what happens when we try to do that in D&D? Combat, as we see it in horror films and in horror video games, is often a fight of attrition or a delay for time or an attempt to escape. But in D&D, we have the rigidity of hit points and armor class and the expectation of how combat is supposed to work. Combat in D&D is overwhelmingly slow, tactical, and meticulous. A round that only lasts 6 seconds can take 10, 20 minutes, or even longer. And you simply can't create a sense of horror and fear and immediacy when a 6-second action takes a player and a DM 5 minutes or more to describe, roll, and do the math for. Now, there's a much larger conversation about D&D combat techniques and tweaks and options. We've made some of those videos, but that's not really the point I'm trying to make here, that D&D combat is slow or bad. That's not what I'm saying. What I am stressing is that the inexorable core of D&D combat requires a separation and an analytical mind that works against the foundations of horror storytelling. And of course, there's the unknown. Much of horror works because of what the character, the audience, or both are unaware of. But D&D is designed to encourage and promote investigation and understanding, and more than that, D&D is about circumventing the unknown in most cases. The terror of the xenomorph stalking the ship is gone with a simple locate creature spell. The suspense of the unknown and actions in Get Out is erased with Zone of Truth, and all of Camp Crystal Lake is made whole again with a few resurrection spells. The foundations of the horror genre are all undermined by the very nature of D&D. And that's not something that D&D is doing wrong. D&D is working exactly how it's intended to. But the foundations of the game work against everything that makes for a truly scary and disturbing horror experience. And D&D tries to get around this. The use of fear or sanity mechanics that are in the Dungeon Master's Guide, as well as the lengthy suggestions for music and lighting and even tone of voice that you can find in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft are there. But even with those in place, most games of Curse of Strahd that I've ever watched or listened to on a podcast or been a part of have pretty quickly turned into Monty Python hunting Dracula. Ultimately, D&D is about characters who grow in power and strength and ability, being played by players that have pages of cool abilities that they desperately want to use. And that is totally fine. But horror is often about scared, uninformed people struggling against forces that they don't understand and they can't overcome. Let me put it this way. D&D is set up that you can run a horror adventure game. With D&D, you could run Aliens, the action sequel, but you're going to have a really hard time running the original Alien. So if you're looking for a game that can recreate the feelings of suspense, terror, and dread that you feel watching your favorite horror film, I suggest looking into a different system. And lucky for you, we have a video full of suggestions for other horror RPG systems. So I'd love to hear from you. What do you think it takes to have a good horror-based TTRPG, not just action with the trappings of scary movies? And are there things that you think D&D does do well? If you've got a bunch of suggestions for other games, then go ahead and check out that horror RPG system video and let me know if any of them I've missed on there. All right, thanks a lot, and until next time, I'm Ryan, and this is Roll for Initiative. That's dumb. I mean, I can put stuff away. Sound is rolling? Okay.